She was a whisper in a world of shouts, a ghost in the war machine. They sent her to the highest, most desolate forward operating base in the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, a place where the air was thin and grudges grew thick. She was a geologist, a civilian contractor in a place that only understood the binary language of rank and ordnance. To the soldiers, she was a curiosity. To their commander, she was an insult. But to the mountain, she was a listener, and the mountain was about to speak. And when the enemy came, a self-proclaimed god whose voice was a weapon, it would be the geologist, the quiet woman who understood the language of stone and stress, who would answer. She would end a myth with a single, impossible shot, a bullet bent by gravity and guided by the resonant frequency of the earth itself. She would unmake a god and, in the process, break a king. The silence of forward operating base Epsilon was a physical thing. It had weight, pressing down with the thin, high-altitude atmosphere and the immeasurable tonnage of the granite peaks that clawed at the stratosphere around it. It was a silence composed of layers. The high, keening whine of the wind scouring the ridgelines, the distant percussive groan of a glacier shifting in its sleep, and the almost subaural hum of the base's overstressed power generator. Dr. Eris Thorne felt these layers not as sound, but as data. The wind was a variable in a ballistic equation. The glacial groan was a potential seismic precursor. The generator's hum was a baseline frequency against which he measured the mountain's true pulse. Her station was a cramped alcove carved out of the main command bunker, a space that was once a storage closet. It smelled of ozone, cold rock, and the faint bitter scent of brewed chicory root she favored over coffee. 3 monitors cast a pale blue light on her face, illuminating the fine lines of concentration around her eyes. Her fingers moved with quiet economy across a keyboard, her gaze fixed on a cascade of numbers and waveforms. She was tracking the lithospheric pressure, the subtle isostatic rebound of the tectonic plate as the glacier above them receded by millimeters a year. To everyone else, it was dead rock. To Eris, it was a living system, a vast and complex engine of unimaginable power, and they were camped precariously on its cylinder head. She wore simple gray fatigues, devoid of rank or insignia, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, practical knot. She had been here for 53 days, and in that time she had spoken perhaps 1,000 words. Her purpose was esoteric, defined in a contract full of classified clauses and geophysical jargon. She was here to provide environmental analysis, a term so benignly vague it invited ridicule. The soldiers, lean and hardened men and women, worn smooth by boredom and tension, mostly left her alone. They saw a scientist, an academic, an anomaly. They did not see a weapon. A heavy tread on the grated floor signaled his approach before his shadow fell across her monitors. Major Kalin was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains, but without any of its patience. He was broad, loud, and carried his authority like a bludgeon. His presence was a disruption to the bunker's delicate equilibrium, a blast of hot, overpressurized air. He stopped behind her, radiating disapproval. "Still staring at your screens, Doctor?" His voice was a blunt instrument, accustomed to being obeyed. "Find any interesting pebbles today?" Eris did not turn. Her focus remained on a specific wavelet anomaly propagating from the northeast quadrant. It was faint, but its frequency was unnatural, too rhythmic. "The mountain is always interesting, Major." "The mountain," he scoffed. the sound echoing slightly in the confined space. Is a lump of rock we sit on. My concern is what's on the other side of it. The Ghost Division. Silas. He said the name with a mix of frustration and grudging respect. Silas was the enemy commander, a charismatic phantom who had turned this sector into a graveyard for 3 rotations. He's out there, and I intend to dig him out. My concern is with trajectories and munitions, not tectonic plates. They are the same concern, Eris stated, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. She pointed a single steady finger at her screen. This strata here, the shale deposit running along the Serpent's Spine Ridge, is unstable. Your planned artillery emplacement zone has a 78% probability of shear failure under sustained percussive shock. Kalen leaned in, his bulk crowding her space. He smelled of stale coffee and aggressive certainty. He glanced at the complex geological map, his eyes uncomprehending and dismissive. I have the best combat engineers in the Corps. They say the ground is solid. I'll take the word of a soldier over a rock sniffer, no offense intended. None taken, she replied, though the air had grown colder. The data does not care about the profession of the person reading it. The stress fractures are already present. Sustained bombardment will liquefy the substrata. Your guns will slide into the valley. Noted, Kalen said, the word a clear dismissal. He straightened up, his tone shifting to one of public address as he saw Sergeant Reyes approach. Reyes, I want the Sentinels moved to forward positions Alpha and Bravo by 0600. We're going to be sighting the big guns tomorrow, and I want eyes on every approach. Sergeant Marcus Reyes was a stark contrast to his commander. Where Kalen was oak, Reyes was whipcord. He was quieter, his eyes missing nothing. He glanced from his commander to the back of Eris's head, then to her screen. He didn't understand the squiggles and numbers, but he understood the quiet, unshakable certainty in her voice. He had learned to recognize competence in all its forms. Sir, Reyes said, his voice respectful, but with a questioning edge. Forward Alpha is directly below the Serpent's spine. If that ridge is as unstable as the doctor says... Kalen's jaw tightened. He had been publicly challenged, however mildly. His authority, which he conflated with his ego, had been questioned. He turned his full, overbearing attention on Eris. Dr. Thorne, you are a civilian analyst. Your job is to provide data, which I will then incorporate into my tactical decisions as I see fit. Your unsolicited opinions on troop deployment are not required. Your dire predictions are noted and filed. Are we clear? Eris finally swiveled her chair to face him. Her eyes were a calm, slate gray, and they held his for a moment longer than was comfortable for him. She did not look intimidated. She looked like a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. You are the commander, Major. The clarity of your orders is your responsibility. His face flushed a dull red. She had not argued, had not fought back, but she had somehow won the exchange. She had turned his declaration of power back on him, making it his own burden. He hated it. He hated the quiet, analytical way she looked at him, as if he were just another variable in one of her equations. See that you remember that, he bit out, then turned and stalked away, his boots hammering on the floor. Reyes lingered for a moment. He looked at Eris, a question in his eyes. Sergeant, she said, her voice returning to its neutral, data-driven tone as she turned back to her screens. The harmonic tremor in this sector has increased by 0.02% in the last hour. I would advise your men at Forward Alpha to secure their equipment for significant ground-level vibration. Reyes nodded slowly. I'll see to it, Doctor. He didn't say he believed her over the major. He didn't have to. He was a good soldier. He collected all available intelligence before acting. And the woman who spoke the language of the mountain was a source he was not willing to ignore. The confrontation in the command bunker was a small tremor, a precursor to the earthquake to come. Kalen, infuriated by Aris's quiet defiance, doubled down on his plan. He saw her warnings not as valuable intelligence, but as an attack on his authority. He would prove her wrong. He would break the enemy and the mountain with the same application of overwhelming force. It was the only way he knew. The briefing was held in the cramped mess hall, the air thick with the smell of recycled air and simmering tension. Kalen stood before a holographic map of the dragon's tooth range, a glowing red circle marking his target, a suspected enemy stronghold in a valley on the far side of the massif. His plan was simple, brutal, and utterly conventional. At 0800, 2 batteries of M77s will commence a sustained bombardment of grid squares Delta 4 through Delta 7, he announced, his pointer stabbing at the map. We will pound their positions into dust for 3 hours. This is about shock and awe. We will soften them up, demoralize them, and then at 1100, Raptor and Talon companies will advance through the Serpent's Spine Pass and clean up whatever is left. Aris stood at the back of the room, a silent observer. She had not been invited, but she had come anyway. Her presence was a quiet rebuke to Kalen's entire strategy. He saw her there, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. A flicker of irritation crossed his face before he deliberately ignored her. Our intel suggests Silas himself is in that stronghold, Kalen continued, his voice rising with practiced, motivational fervor. This is our chance to cut the head off the snake. This terrain has been their greatest ally. Today, we turn it into their tomb. A few of the younger soldiers murmured in agreement, caught up in his aggressive confidence. But the veterans, men like Sergeant Reyes, watched the map with tight, worried expressions. They knew the dragon's tooth. They knew its treachery. The pass Kalen had chosen was a notorious kill zone, a narrow, winding path with sheer cliffs on both sides. When Kalen finished, he asked if there were any questions. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Aris spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room with the precision of a scalpel. Major, your bombardment plan targets the keystone of the Serpent's Spine geological formation. The sustained rhythmic impact of the artillery shells will create a harmonic resonance within the shale deposit. Every eye in the room turned to her. Kalen's face hardened into a mask of contempt. Get to the point, Doctor, he snapped. The point, she said, her calm unwavering, is that your bombardment will not just soften the enemy, it will trigger a catastrophic landslide. The entire western face of the pass will collapse. You won't be sending your men into a tomb. You will be burying them in one. A wave of unease washed over the room. The soldiers looked from Aris's face, etched with cold certainty, to Kalen's, which was rapidly turning a shade of purple. He felt his control of the room, of the situation, slipping away. This civilian, this woman, was systematically dismantling his authority in front of his men. That is a ridiculous assertion, Kalen boomed, trying to reclaim the narrative with sheer volume. My engineers have assessed the pass. It is stable. Your engineers used standard soil penetrometers, Aris countered, taking a step forward. A data slate in her hand came to life, projecting a transparent, rotating 3D model of the mountain's internal structure into the air beside her. Lines of red and yellow, indicating stress and fracture points, riddled the image of the serpent's spine. They measured surface-level compaction. They did not have ground-penetrating radar or seismic resonance scanners. They are looking at the skin. I am showing you the bones, and the bones are broken. The holographic model was mesmerizing. It showed what she had described with terrifying clarity. The area Kalen planned to bombard was a nexus of glowing red stress lines. Even to the untrained eye, it looked fragile, ready to shatter. Kalen stared at the image, his mind unable to process the data, but fully aware of the effect it was having on his soldiers. He had to shut it down. Now. "That is a simulation," he spat, waving a dismissive hand. "A theory. I deal in facts, Doctor, in the reality on the ground. And the reality is that the enemy is over there, and we are going over there to kill them. Your ghost story about the mountain falling down is a distraction, a failure of nerve." He turned his glare on the assembled troops. "We are soldiers. We do not fear shadows on a screen. We trust in our training, our equipment, and our command structure." His words were meant to rally them, to remind them of the hierarchy. But the seed of doubt had been planted. They had seen the model. They had heard the calm, unshakable logic in her voice. Eris switched off the display. She had presented the data. What he did with it was on him. She had fulfilled her duty. "The probability of my theory being correct is 91%, Major. The data is available for your review." She turned and walked out of the briefing room, leaving a cavernous silence in her wake. Kalen watched her go, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. She had not raised her voice, had not insulted him, but she had humiliated him completely. He felt the eyes of his men on him, and in them he saw not admiration, but a new and terrifying calculation. His decision was made in that moment of burning shame. He would proceed with the plan. He had to. To back down now would be to admit she was right, that his experience and rank were secondary to her cold, sterile data. He would rather risk his men's lives than his own authority. It was a fatal miscalculation. The crisis began not with a bang, but with a sudden, deafening silence. At 07:59, 1 minute before Kalen's bombardment was scheduled to begin, every screen in the command bunker went black. The low hum of active communications died, replaced by the hiss of static. The lights flickered, then held, running on the local generator. They were cut off. "Report!" Kalen bellowed into the sudden darkness. A frantic comms tech worked at his console. "Total blackout, sir. All comms arrays are down. Satellite, radio, microwave, everything. It's not an equipment failure. It's like something just snipped the cord." Eris was already at her own station. Her seismic sensors were independent, hardwired directly into the mountain itself. They were still online. Her screen showed a series of sharp, localized tremors, not from the northeast this time, but from the south and west. They were small, precise, and perfectly spaced. "They targeted the relay towers," she said, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "They're on the outlying peaks. They use small, precise charges to cripple the foundations. Not to destroy them, but to knock them out of alignment. It's surgical." Kalen stormed over to her. "How do you know that?" "The seismic signature," she explained, pointing to a series of sharp spikes on her display. "They're not natural. They're artificial, low-yield explosives. Timed perfectly. They know our infrastructure." Before anyone could process the implications of that, a new sound intruded. A voice, amplified and distorted, crackled through a single emergency speaker that had inexplicably come to life. It was smooth, confident, and laced with mocking amusement. "Major Kalen, good morning. I do hope I haven't interrupted your plans." The blood drained from Kalen's face. "Silas?" "The one and only," the voice purred. "I've taken the liberty of simplifying your command structure. You no longer have to worry about communicating with the outside world. From now on, you only have to talk to me. Consider me your new higher command." The entire bunker was frozen. Silas had not only cut them off, he had hijacked their last line of communication. He was inside their network. He was in their heads. "My men on the ridges have a lovely view of your base," Silas continued, his tone conversational. "They tell me you're preparing your artillery, a bold plan, a very loud plan. But I'm afraid you won't be needing those guns, not where you're going." On Eris's screen, a new series of tremors began to register. They were larger, more powerful, and they were coming from the serpent's spine, exactly where she had warned him. "What's he doing?" Kalen demanded, his eyes wide. "He's not doing anything," Eris said, her voice grim. "You are. He's just helping." She brought up the 3D model of the mountain. New, vibrant red lines were spreading through the pass like a virus. "He's placed resonance charges, small explosives designed not to cause damage, but to vibrate at a specific frequency, the same frequency your artillery shells would have generated. He's triggering the landslide for you." A deafening roar filled the air, a sound that was felt in the bones as much as it was heard. The entire bunker shook violently. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling. On the main view screen, which was now slaved to a single hard-wired external camera, the image was apocalyptic. The entire western face of the serpent's spine was collapsing, a slow-motion avalanche of millions of tons of rock and ice pouring down into the pass Kalen had intended to send his men through. He had planned to make it a tomb. Silas had turned it into a grave before the first shot was even fired. The voice of Silas returned, dripping with theatrical sympathy. "Oh dear, it seems the mountain is not in a cooperative mood today. Such a tragedy. All that lovely, expensive equipment, buried, just as your men would have been." A pause, for effect. "You see, Major, you think you are fighting me, but you are not. You are fighting this place, and you do not understand the rules." Kalen stood paralyzed, his face a canvas of horror and disbelief. His plan was in ruins, his authority shattered. He had walked his men to the edge of a cliff, and his enemy had shown him the abyss. His by-the-book tactics, his reliance on brute force, had been turned against him with devastating intellectual elegance. He had tried to use a hammer, and Silas had used the mountain as an anvil. In the stunned silence that followed the roar of the avalanche, Kalen's failure was absolute. The men and women in the command bunker looked at him, and for the first time, they did not see a commander. They saw a liability. They saw a man whose arrogance had almost gotten them all killed. His orthodox methods had not just failed, they had been predicted, co-opted, and used as a weapon against him. Sergeant Reyes was the first to break the paralysis. He looked at the collapsed pass on the screen, then at the Major's slack-jawed expression, and finally, his gaze settled on Eris Thorne. She was calm. While everyone else was reeling from the shock, she was already working, her fingers flying across her keyboard, her eyes analyzing the new seismic data from the landslide. She was not reacting to the crisis. She was processing it. Silas's voice echoed again from the speaker, a serpent coiling around the room. Now that we have that unpleasantness out of the way, let us discuss the terms of your surrender. You are surrounded. You are cut off. You have no long-range capabilities left. Your situation is, to use a technical term, hopeless. Do you know who I am, Major? I am the man who holds your every breath in his hand. Kalen flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was broken. It was in that moment of collective paralysis, the vacuum left by the collapse of traditional authority, that Aris stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not seize command. She simply became the only viable option. Authority, in that instant, flowed to her as naturally as water flows downhill. His position is not dominant, she stated, her voice cutting through Silas's monologue. It's a bluff. Every head in the room swiveled towards her. Kalen stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and resentment. He's broadcasting from a single, high-gain transmitter, Eris continued, her eyes fixed on her screen. The landslide he triggered has created a unique acoustic environment. The sound waves of his transmission are reflecting off the new rock face. They are creating multipath interference. I can use that interference to triangulate his exact position. She looked up from her monitors, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces in the room. But I can do better than that. A new energy filled the room, replacing despair with a fragile, tentative hope. It was the energy of competence. Reyes moved to her side, his voice low and steady. "What do you need, doctor?" He didn't call her ma'am. He didn't look to the major for approval. He recognized the new center of gravity in the room. "I need the M110 sniper rifle from the armory," Eris said. "The one chambered for the .338 Lapua Magnum. I need 3 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. I also need the schematics for the main communications tower and a single C4 demolition charge, the smallest one you have." The requests were so specific, so bizarre, that they short-circuited the military minds in the room. A sniper rifle and a demolition charge? What was she planning? Kalen finally found his voice, a weak, sputtering thing. "That's insane. You're a civilian. You're not authorized to handle military-grade weapons or explosives." Eris turned her cool, analytical gaze on him. "Your authorization is no longer a relevant variable in this equation, Major. Silas has created a complex physics problem. I am the only one here qualified to solve it." Her words were not a challenge. They were a statement of fact, and everyone in the room knew it was true. Reyes didn't hesitate. He looked at 2 of his most trusted specialists. "You heard her. Get it done. Now." The 2 soldiers, seeing the certainty in their sergeant's eyes, moved without question. They bypassed the major as if he were a piece of furniture. The established hierarchy was gone, replaced by a new one, based not on rank, but on the desperate need for a solution. Kalen could only watch, impotent, as his command evaporated before his eyes. The crew, the entire system, had shifted its allegiance. They were her men now. The plan she outlined was, on its surface, an act of madness. It was not a military strategy. It was a symphony of physics, geology, and ballistics. Silas, she explained, had hidden himself cleverly. He was not on a peak, exposed to view. He was nestled in a small, reinforced cave on the far side of a secondary ridge, a position with no direct line of sight from the base. It was a perfect sniper's hide, but for transmitting, not for shooting. He felt completely safe. "He's using the mountain as a shield," Reyes observed, studying the holographic map Eris had generated. "There's no way to get a shot at him. The ridge is in the way." A straight line is not the only path a projectile can take, Eris responded, her fingers dancing over her console. She brought up a new set of calculations, equations of such complexity that they looked like a foreign language. He believes the rock will protect him. He is wrong. He has forgotten that the shield can also be a lens. Her solution was audacious. She was not going to shoot through the mountain. She was going to shoot around it. The landslide has exposed a deep vein of iron-rich magnetite on the face of the collapsed pass, she explained, highlighting the area on her map. At the same time, the communications blackout means the only active, high-power electromagnetic field in this area is our own comms tower. If I can use the C4 charge to create a precise, high-frequency vibration, a resonance pulse, in the tower's superstructure, I can turn the entire tower into a massive electromagnet for a fraction of a second. She paused, letting the implication sink in. That pulse will project a focused magnetic field that will be reflected and amplified by the magnetite deposit. For a duration of approximately 0.8 seconds, it will create a temporary, localized gravity distortion in the air along the face of the pass. A gravitational lens. The room was silent. The soldiers and technicians stared at her, their minds struggling to comprehend the scale of what she was proposing. She was talking about bending space, about using a mountain as a component in a weapon of impossible precision. "You're going to bend the bullet?" Reyes asked, his voice full of awe. "In a manner of speaking," Eris confirmed. "The bullet's trajectory will follow the curvature of the distorted spacetime. It will travel a parabolic path around the intervening ridge. The target is 7,200 meters away, with a vertical drop of 800 meters and a lateral curve of 150 meters. The calculations must be perfect." Kalen laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "This is a fantasy. It's science fiction. You can't bend a bullet." Eris ignored him. She was already moving, stripping down the M110 rifle with an expert's familiarity. She replaced the standard scope with a custom-built device from her own equipment, a complex array of lenses and sensors that she networked directly to her main console. The Coriolis effect at this altitude and latitude will account for a 9.3-meter drift. The spin drift from the rifling will add another 1.2 meters. The Magnus effect from the crosswind in the valley is negligible, as the bullet's path will be shielded by the new pass wall. The primary variable is the timing. She handed the small C4 charge to Reyes. "This needs to be placed at the primary resonance node of the tower's base. It's marked on the schematic. Detonated on my command. The window between detonation, field generation, and the shot will be 350 milliseconds. There is no margin for error." Reyes took the charge, his hand steady. He had no idea if this was possible, but he knew with absolute certainty that it was their only chance. He looked at Aris, not as a scientist, but as his commander. Understood. The execution was a masterpiece of quiet, focused intensity. Aris positioned herself at an exposed firing point on the edge of the base, the wind whipping at her fatigues. The rifle felt like a natural extension of her body. She was not a soldier, but she had been trained by the people who wrote the manuals. Her custom scope did not show a magnified image of the target. It showed a data overlay, a visual representation of the equation she had run. She was not aiming at a man, she was aiming at a solution. Through the open comms linked to the bunker, she could hear Silas's voice, still taunting them, unaware of the impossible physics being arrayed against him. "Your silence is telling, Major. Have you run out of ideas? Run out of men willing to die for you?" It's a lonely feeling, isn't it? To be a king with no subjects. Aris settled the rifle butt into her shoulder, her breathing slowing until it was almost imperceptible. She watched the numbers on her scope converge. The atmospheric pressure, the ambient temperature, the micro tremors of the earth beneath her, all were fed into the final firing solution. "Reyes," she said, her voice a calm whisper into her throat mic. "Stand by to detonate." "Standing by," came the reply. "Do you know who I am?" Silas's voice mocked from the speaker in the bunker. The sound carried faintly to her on the wind. "I am the ghost that haunts these mountains. I am the fear in the back of your mind. I am the god of this desolate place." Aris adjusted her aim by a fraction of a millimeter. The targeting reticle on her scope was not on a physical point, but on a calculated coordinate in empty space, the entry point to the gravitational lens she was about to create. "Now, Reyes," she commanded. A dull thud echoed from the base of the comms tower, a sound barely audible over the wind. It was not an explosion. It was a tuning fork being struck. For a fraction of a second, the air itself seemed to shimmer. On her scope, a cascade of numbers confirmed the magnetic field was live, stable, and perfectly formed. The gravitational lens was open. "I am the final word in your pathetic little lives," Silas proclaimed, his voice reaching its arrogant crescendo. Aris exhaled, her finger tightening on the trigger. Perfect. She fired. The crack of the rifle was sharp and absolute. The .338 round left the barrel at over 850 meters per second. To any observer, it would have looked like a miss. The bullet flew not towards the enemy's ridge, but wide towards the sheer, newly exposed rock face of the collapsed pass. But then, something impossible happened. As the bullet entered the area of the invisible gravitational lens, its trajectory bent, curving in a smooth, elegant arc. It followed the warped path she had predicted, a silver sliver of death riding a wave of manipulated physics. It skirted the edge of the intervening ridge, silent and unseen. In the command bunker, everyone held their breath. They watched Aris's monitor, which showed the calculated trajectory of the bullet as a glowing red line. They saw it curve around the mountain. Silas was mid-sentence. "I am the one who His voice cut off into a sharp burst of static. Then silence. A profound, echoing silence that was more shocking than any explosion. The single emergency speaker went dead. The hostile presence that had held them captive was simply gone. For a long moment, no one moved. They stared at the silent speaker, at the quiet monitors. Did it work? Was it possible? Then, a new voice crackled over the comms, a voice they recognized. It was one of their own spotters, stationed at a high-altitude post that had been cut off. He had line of sight to Silas's hideout. His voice was choked with disbelief and awe. "Command, this is Sentinel-2. I have eyes on the target's location. Single impact, center mass. Target neutralized. I repeat, target is confirmed, neutralized. How in the hell?" A single ragged cheer broke the tension in the bunker, then another, until the entire room erupted. The men and women were shouting, clapping each other on the back, a tidal wave of relief and victory washing over them. They had been trapped, helpless, and on the brink of surrender. And now they were free. The external threat was completely and utterly neutralized. In the midst of the celebration, Kalen stood alone, his face pale. He looked at the celebrating soldiers. Then his gaze drifted to the monitor, showing the impossible, curved trajectory. He understood, in that moment, that he had not just been defeated by the enemy, He had been rendered obsolete by the woman he had dismissed as a rock sniffer. Aris, from her firing position, felt no elation. She simply ejected the spent cartridge, the brass casing warm against the cold wind. She had identified a problem, calculated a solution, and executed it. The result was within the expected parameters. She packed her equipment with the same methodical calm she had displayed throughout the entire crisis. The job was done. The restoration of communications happened almost as suddenly as their loss. With Silas's jamming signal gone, the base's automated systems began re-establishing links. The first priority channel to open was a high-level command frequency, a direct link to Central Command. A face appeared on the main view screen, a man with graying temples and the weary, intelligent eyes of a 4-star general. His nameplate read, General Thorne. Kalen, seeing a chance to salvage some remnant of his authority, immediately stepped before the camera. General, this is Major Kalen at FOB Epsilon. We have been under attack and our communications were severed. I am pleased to report that the situation is now under control. The enemy commander, Silas, has been eliminated. He was careful with his wording, avoiding the specifics of how it was achieved. General Thorne's expression was unreadable, cold as glacial ice. He listened to Kalen's report without interruption. I have your after-action report, Major. The one that was automatically uploaded the instant your comms were restored. The one that contains all sensor logs, voice recordings, and tactical data for the past 3 hours. Kalen's face went white. He had forgotten about the black box, the system that recorded everything. I see here, the general continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, that you were advised of the geological instability of the Serpent Spine Pass. I see that you ignored that advice. I see that your intended bombardment would have resulted in the loss of 2 companies of men had the enemy not triggered the landslide for you. And I see that you were rendered completely ineffective and had ceded de facto command to a civilian contractor. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Kalen's career in front of his entire command. He began to stammer, to make excuses. General, the situation was unprecedented. The contractor, General Thorne interrupted, his voice like cracking steel, is Dr. Eris Thorne, codename Echo. She is the lead architect of Project Chimera. Her official title is Strategic Advisor for Unconventional Warfare Solutions, and her security clearance is 3 levels above yours, Major. She was not sent to your base to advise you. She was sent to your base to see if you were competent enough to listen to someone whose knowledge exceeded your own. She was your final exam. The revelation landed with the force of a physical shock. Eris Thorne. Echo. The name was a legend in the intelligence community, a ghost story whispered by operators. The architect of a dozen impossible victories, a strategist who saw the battlefield not as a map, but as a complex interconnected system of physics, psychology, and probability. She wasn't just a geologist, she was the final arbiter of military Darwinism. You failed that exam, Major Kalen, the general stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. You valued your ego above the lives of your men and the success of the mission. You are relieved of your command, effective immediately. Sergeant Reyes will assume temporary command of FOB Epsilon until your replacement arrives. You will be confined to your quarters to await court-martial. Kalen swayed on his feet, his face a mask of utter devastation. His fall from power was not just swift, it was absolute. He had built his world on the rigid foundation of rank and protocol. And that world had just been demolished by a force he could not comprehend. He was led away by two military police officers, a broken man who did not even have the strength to protest. General Thorne's gaze then softened, just slightly, as he looked past the camera, as if seeing into the bunker. Echo, Eris, report. Eris had entered the command bunker, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She stepped into the camera's view, her face as calm and composed as ever. The assembled soldiers parted for her, their expressions a mixture of awe and reverence. "Threat neutralized, General," she said, her voice formal. "The primary objective is complete. The secondary objective, evaluating command readiness under systemic stress, is also complete. The data has been uploaded." "I've seen the data, Eris," he said, and for the first time, a hint of warmth entered his voice. "The shot was elegant, a new record, I believe." "The math was sound," she replied simply. "Indeed," the general nodded. "Your transport will be there at 2200. Well done. Thorne out." The screen went blank. A new order had been established. It was quieter, more efficient, and built on the unshakable bedrock of demonstrated competence. Sergeant Reyes, now in command, looked at Aris, not with the familiarity of a subordinate to a superior, but with the profound respect of a student for a master. The hierarchy had been restored, but it was now aligned with the true distribution of power. Later that evening, as Aris was running a final diagnostic on her seismic sensors, Reyes approached her. He didn't offer congratulations or praise. He knew she would find such things irrelevant. Instead, he handed her a steaming mug of the brewed chicory root he had seen her drinking. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice quiet. "The gravitational lens. You accounted for the bullet's deformation as it entered the warped field. How did you calculate the change in its ballistic coefficient in real time?" Eris took the mug, the warmth a small, pleasant sensation against her cold fingers. She looked at him, and a rare, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. He wasn't asking what she did. He was asking how. He was trying to learn. That, to her, was the highest form of respect. "The coefficient is not a constant," she explained. "It's a function of the energy state of the field. I modeled it as a probability wave, not a solid object. The scope wasn't tracking the bullet. It was tracking the highest probability of its quantum state." Reyes just nodded, absorbing the information. He would likely never understand it, but he understood the mind that could. He understood that he had just witnessed something legendary. "Thank you, Doctor." He left her to her work. The quiet acknowledgement was complete. The cultural shift in the base was permanent. They had learned a lesson that would be passed down for a generation of soldiers. That the loudest voice in the room is not always the strongest, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one who listens. At 2200, a sleek, unmarked suborbital transport descended, its engines making almost no sound. It touched down on the landing pad with the delicacy of a ghost. Eris Thorne, her gear packed in a single Pelican case, walked across the tarmac. She did not look back. Her purpose here was fulfilled. She left behind a broken major, a humbled command, and a mountain that was, for the first time in a long time, truly quiet. She had arrived as a whisper, an anomaly that the system tried to reject. She left as a legend, a story that would be told in hushed, reverent tones for years to come. The story of the quiet geologist who could hear the secrets of the stone, who faced down a self-proclaimed god and his mocking question, "Do you know who I am?" and answered it with a single, impossible shot that bent the very laws of the universe to her will. She was echo, and her silence was the final word.